Hello everyone, welcome to today's video. Today's video is all about the golden age of Hollywood. You might like to call it the studio system. This is going to relate back to our study of Vertigo, and Vertigo was made in the mid 1950s. So it actually represents the end of the studio system era, the end of the golden age. By the time Vertigo was made, a lot of the ideas we're actually going to talk about in this video or kind of starting to be out of date, and a lot of the ideas in Vertigo are kind of reacting against this idea and this particular system of business. It's called the studio system. So this era is all about when the studios moved to Hollywood, California, and became really powerful businesses. In the early days of cinema, when cinema was first an experiment, it was just as important to Europe as it was to Hollywood, to the US. So in Europe, we had a really strong film industry in Germany, in France, and in the UK. But there were a couple of world wars which got in our way a little bit. But they didn't get in the way of Hollywood. So Hollywood really took off during this era, and we had other things on our mind. This particular era, I would say, goes from like the mid 1920s to the early 1950s. It goes from the end of the silent film era through to the early days of the talkies, and then up to this boom time for American cinema, which was sort of like the 1940s and 1950s, and this time when Hollywood really began to dominate globally. So what we're going to do today is unpick some of the reasons why it became so dominant. We're going to start with a business term called vertical integration. So business students, you might have heard this. So vertical integration is a business word, a business term that means a business that controls the flow of the product through the market. Okay, so they control making the product, distributing, which is selling, which is getting the product out there, and in our case for film studies, exhibition. So let me explain how that works within a film sort of like remit. So production, this is all about the film studios. So a studio creates the film. So it has the writers, the actors, the director, the editor, the art department, all under their contract, all under their control. So these people, like the writer, the editor, the composer, the costume designer, no one was freelance back in these days. Everybody worked for a specific studio. More on that later. So they made a film. And then the same company distributes the film. So the same company will sell it to Europe, they will sell it to South America, and they will also sell it to any independent cinema chains in the US. More on that later. But these particular studios also own their own cinema chains as well. So that means they're vertically integrated. They control production, distribution, exhibition. So all the phases of a product going through the market, the one company, the one studio has control over it. And it wasn't just one big company that had a monopoly over the business, it was several. Okay, so there were several companies, and they all sort of like had various levels of control, but they all had a lot of control over the business. They were called the Big Five. And each of these Big Five kind of started to have a particular style to them. And they became famous for particular ways of making films and particular looks of films and particular stars, because the stars were contracted to the studio. So these are the Big Five. We got Warner Brothers, okay? These were the pioneers of the gangster genre, okay? Warner Brothers also were really ahead of the curve when it came to sound. They released The Jazz Singer, which is considered to be the first talkie. We have the film, we have Paramount, and they did a lot of comedies. Okay, they did a lot of light fare. One of their big stars was called Mae West, and she was a really bawdy star in Broadway. She was a New Yorker. She had a really interesting and turbulent sort of like upbringing, and she was a vaudeville star. Okay, so she was a really big character. And she made her name in theatre and vaudeville, and then she made her way onto the screen quite late in life. Actually, she didn't really become a film star until she was in her late 30s, which is really quite late. A little tidbit about Mae West: she was in a scandalous theatre show called Sex, which she purposefully created and directed because she wanted it to be scandalous. She wanted to get a name for like the scandal. So you can look that up. It's really interesting. Little tidbit about Mae West there. We also have 20th Century Fox. Now, 20th Century Fox, they were the classy ones, okay? They specialised in biographies, high class entertainment. They specialised in adaptations of novels, okay? Very, very highbrow. Then we have MGM, Metro Goldwyn Mayer. They were big on the musicals. Can you see you've got Warner Brother, Metro Goldwyn Mayer, 20th Century Fox, RKO, all have got musicals that they're famous for. Musicals were very popular in this era. There was one particular star of musical stage and screen. Oh my gosh, I can't remember her name. It's fallen out of my head. But her sort of like act was that she was a famous like a swimmer and diver. So her musicals were very specifically about someone who could do musical numbers in the water. Her name will come back to me at some point, and I'll probably yell it out as the presentation goes on. And we have RKO, who had Orson Welles, and they had Fred and Ginger as well. So Fred Astaire, Ginger Rogers, again, more musicals. So we have the big five, and we have the little three. So the big five here, these guys are all vertically integrated. So that means, once again, they controlled the production, the distribution, and the exhibition of the product. The little three, however, not quite so powerful. They still made good money. They still had business. But these guys had different areas that they focused on. So we had Universal, the kings and queens of horror. These were cheap little B movies back in the day, like The Cat People and The Mummy, Return of the Mummy, Son of the Mummy, Mummy Meets Frankenstein, Mummy Meets Dracula. All these really brilliant universal horrors. That's how they made their name. That's how they made their money. So they specialized in making films, but not really the distribution and exhibition end of it. We have Columbia, and we also have quite an interesting one which is called United Artists. It's called United Artists because famous artists of the silent era, including Charlie Chaplin and Douglas Fairbanks, formed a company, and Mary Pickford. Let's not forget about her. She was a real firecracker, real brilliant, interesting character. And she and they created their own company because they were famous enough to buy themselves out of their contracts and form their own company so that they could make types of films that they wanted to. These guys were not vertically integrated. They mostly specialized in making films, but not necessarily distributing them. Okay. So at this time, generally to talk American context, we're talking about the era of the Great Depression. 1929, a stock market crash. Okay, so the knock-on effect of that, as you can see in the bullet points here, that the knock-on effect of that within a few years, massive unemployment, and many banks in the US collapsed, which means that people lost all their money. There was also no social welfare at the time, or very minimal. It relied on charity and the church to support the poor. Here's some images on this screen. We've got a bread line up there at the top, and we've got people protesting at the bottom about the lack of employment in the US at this time. So there was something else as well to compound this effect. There was a bit of a drought in it's called the Dust Bowl area of the US. So those middle-y kind of states. And so it meant that times were tough in the rural areas. So a lot of people left those towns to go and try and find work and opportunities in the city. And there weren't much work and opportunities in the city either. But cinema, movies thrived in this era. Okay, the big five became even stronger and even more powerful because as a lot of the smaller little cinemas and movie theaters and studios went out of business, they bought up all those assets. So they became stronger as other companies started to die out. And as they became stronger and stronger, they started to have like more control over like independent cinema chains, for example. And they exercised this control through block booking and blind bidding. So this is how those particular things work. Okay, block booking. If you come to me, say you're the owner of an independent cinema like this one on the screen, the Comet Theatre. I think that's in Coney Island. So say you're the owner of the Comet Theatre. You're an independent cinema, but you want to buy Gone with the Wind. That's my film. I'm that. Okay, so that's the studio. You're going to come to me and you're going to say, right, Gone with the Wind, please. I'm going to be like, well, you can have Gone with. Oh, I should probably do it in character. You can have Gone with the Wind, but you gotta have Mr. Papa's Penguins, and you also gotta have Mr. Tootsie Goes to Washington. You gotta have all my duds. Okay, so you have your A-list movie. You've got Gone with the Wind in the package, but then you've got a lot of B movies in the package as well. And you can't say no because then you won't get Gone with the Wind, which is where you know you're going to make your money. So block booking. So you buy a package of films from the studio, which means you might end up spending all your money on that package and get like Gone with the Wind and then get some other movies. But that's the package that you have, and that's the package that you're going to have to show. Another way in which the studios like ran people out of business was blind bidding. So you're the independent cinema, your Comet Theatre, and you're going to pitch to me a price. You're going to say, okay, I'll buy that package for X amount, and I will say, I want more from you. But then if another cinema comes and like I want to run them out of town, I could charge a lot more. So I could say, okay, but I'm going to charge you over there. I'm going to charge you more. And the two cinemas, they're blind bidding, so they don't know what the other person's paying. So me as the big boss studio, I can select who I want to put out of business, and I can charge them more, and I can pretty much bankrupt them if I want to. One of the reasons why people really went to the cinema a lot in this era. It still remains, I think, like the highest ticket sales in this era, much more than today's, because if you think about it, there were, people couldn't afford a radio. Very wealthy people might have had a radio in the later part of this era. Television, what's that? So this was entertainment, okay, and it was cheap. It was much, much cheaper than it is today. Today we pay what, like £10 or more for a cinema ticket. Back then it would have been like cents. It would have been, you would have gone to see the same film like a few times if you really liked it. You go and see it a few times over and over. So and you might have gone to the cinema maybe a couple of times a week. So it was very much more ingrained in the social discourse. You go to the cinema a lot more. And what did people want at this time? When like times were really, really tough during the Great Depression, you want the musical, you want escapism, you want glamour, you want to see a parade of beautiful girls high kicking wearing golden hot pants. Okay, and that's what you're going to get when you go to the cinema. Okay, you're going to get entertainment, escapism, glamour. That was the business of Hollywood. And as technology advanced, these big studios who could afford to refit their movie theaters with sound, for example, made even more money because more cinemas went out of business when sound came in. So sound came in around about 1927. The film that is generally considered to be the first talkie is called The Jazz Singer, and this is a Warner Brothers film. Let's take a little look at The Jazz Singer. Now, this comes with a warning because this is about a man called Al Jolson, who was a famous singer and vaudeville star in this era. And he performs this routine in blackface. Okay, so he is a white vaudeville performer performing in black face paint, and this would have been a cultural norm back in 1927. It was a very common thing to see in vaudeville theatre, and it was a performance style of the time. So just be aware of that when we watch this.
Mammy, the sunshine beach, the sunshine wet, but I know where the sunshine best. Mammy, Mammy, my heartstrings are tangled around. Well, Mammy, I'm a coming. Sorry, I made you wait. I'm coming. I hope it's rough.
Okay, so that was a little clip of The Jazz Singer. If you're watching this in class, teacher, you might like to have a little chat right there about some of the content of jazz. The Jazz Singer, 1927. And that is the start of the talkie revolution. If you want to find out a little bit more about the impact of talkies, I really, really think that you should watch Singing in the Rain. It was made much, much later on in the talkies. It's a film about a talkie star, a silent movie star, and then when the talkies come in, he has to rethink his style, and it's a lot of fun. It's got Gene Kelly in it, and so Singing in the Rain, big recommendation if you want to watch a film that's about like the impact of sound on cinema in the 1920s. Another film that actually talks about that really, really well is a bit more contemporary film. It's called The Artist. I think it was maybe 2010-ish. That came out maybe a little bit earlier, and that's another really good film about the use of sound and the impact that it had on cinema at the time. Okay, just another little sort of like snippet here. Becky Sharp was the first film that was made in colour. They're still there. Teacher, I'm going to let you play this if you want. You can have a little look at it, but this comes with another warning as well. There are some comments in this particular, this is the trailer for Becky Sharp. There's some comments in this trailer that are outdated opinions about race. So please bear that in mind before you watch it. So the technique that they used for creating color on this was beforehand they might have like done some color tinting on particular like stills, like hand painting, but this was a new process. So this example, Becky Sharp, this was about using like a new, cheaper process that actually made the entire film color without having to hand paint it. And you can watch that at your own leisure. So, why did the film business move? In the early days of the silent movies, it would have very much been a little bit more of a New York industry. And then later on in the 1920s, it had pretty much left New York and gone to California. And why wouldn't you? If you're a filmmaker, you need a lot of sun, you need a lot of light and very little rain, because that means you can't film in the rain. So weather conditions, a big plus for California. Lots of large open spaces, especially around this small town called Los Angeles, that then became a massive city based on the influx of people that came in from around the country to work in Hollywood. Lots of large open spaces that you can buy. I mean, studios are enormous. They're like small towns. They're absolutely enormous. It's like 20 or so for a big studio. It must be about 20 aircraft hangar sized buildings, and then that's where you do the filming. But you've also got an entire network of other buildings surrounding it, where you've got your costume, you've got your pre-production, post-production offices, you've got your as well as the sound stages, you've got your Foley like offices as well. So there's lots and lots of like infrastructure and like buildings that are in a particular, it's like a small town, on its own. Some of these studios in Los Angeles are so big that they have like their own little specific zip code or postcode. As well, if you want to shoot a Western, you've got landscapes for Westerns. And if you want to shoot something in lush countryside and pretend that you're in France, then you've also can travel up north and you've got not very far away some beautiful lush countryside. So in terms of geography, in terms of like cheap land to buy up and like create your studio, California was a win. So the studios made what we call assembly line films. Now, this is going to be a really good point when you start to think about Vertigo. Okay, the films that a studio would produce, say Warner Brothers in this era, really formulaic. They were formulaic because it was all the same writers, it was all the same actors, it was all the same costume and sets, just kind of recycled in different packages. So the films are really cheap to make, and they made a lot. Okay, a lot of films made cheaply because there was a lot of demand for films. The output of these studios was so much more than it is today. You'd have once a writer had finished writing you a Western, you'd get them to write you another one. Okay, and you'd basically recycle and rematch a lot of the stuff you already had, and you would keep going back to back. It meant that a lot of the codes conventions that we associate with genres such as Westerns and the gangster movies in particular, so that's kind of your Warner Brothers pretty steady fare, they were born in this era, and they were born out of this era because you saw the same actors doing similar things over and over again, and that became synonymous with the genre. It would have become a code of convention. The actors were not independent, okay? You were not a freelance actor back in this day. You didn't have an agent. When you went to Hollywood as a young hopeful, you wanted a contract, okay? You would audition for a contract with a particular studio. You were nobody, you were nothing until you were contracted to a studio. So once you got your contract, you had to make films for that studio for 7 years. Okay, and if you took a break, it was added on to the end of your contract. Okay, so it was just, if you needed maternity leave, if you any kind of like issue that you had at all, it would be added on to the end of your contract. It was really it was a system for the studios. It wasn't a system for the actors. They didn't care as much for your well-being as they would have cared about their profits. Okay, so this particular studio system era, so profits were king, and it meant that as an actor, you couldn't work outside of your contract. You couldn't have a contract with Warner Brothers and then be like, you know what, I fancy making this film over here with Universal. That's not how it worked. If the studio wanted to loan you out, they could do it. They could do a swapsy with you and maybe another similar like level actor with the studio under very rare and special circumstances. But generally speaking, it was definitely you worked for one particular studio. Okay, so this young lady is Shirley Temple, one of the biggest stars in the world at this time. In one year, I think it was 1930, I want to say 33 or 34, she made 12 movies back to back. So it's pretty much one a month. Every, no breaks. So as we're talking about a production line of films, boom, 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 boom. So these actors were usually used, and especially with a young child actor such as Shirley Temple, they've got a limited shelf life, haven't they? So as soon as she would start to become more grown up, her act wouldn't have been able to sell. So you want to use her as much as you can. And the studio controlled you completely. Young child actors such as Shirley Temple, if they made mistakes or if they had tantrums, they had to go and sit on a block of ice to think about what they did, to learn their lesson. I mean, they weren't treated glamorously. Here we go. This is her performing in The Good Ship Lollipop in 1934.
I wish Mother was here.
This is the Candyland Hour for all good children. The orchestra will play our theme song.
You know that song, don't you?
Sure I do.
Well, then sing it. Come on, Shirley, sing it.
I've thrown away my toys, even my drum and train. I want to make some noise with real life aeroplane. Someday I'm going to fly. I'll be a pilot too. And when I do, how would you like to be my crew? On the good ship Lollipop, it's a sweet trip to a candy shop where bonbons play on the sunny beach of Peppermint Bay. Lemonade stands everywhere, Cracker Jack fans fill the air, and there you are, happy landing on a chocolate bar. See the sugar bowl, do the Tootsie Roll with the big bad devil's food cake. If you eat too much, you'll awake with a tummy ache. On the good ship Lollipop, it's a night trip. Into bed you hop and dream away. On the good ship Lollipop. On the good ship Lollipop, it's a sweet trip to a candy shop where bonbons play on the sunny beach of Peppermint Bay. Lemonade stands everywhere, Cracker Jack fans fill the air, and there you are, happy landing on a chocolate
There we go. That was Entertainment back in 1934. So, Shirley Temple had a 7-year contract, and these were some of the other famous actors who were contracted. We have Joan Crawford, Mae West, who I spoke about before, Greta Garbo, Mary Pickford. Now, these were all actresses that were kind of very much pigeonholed in terms of their roles. Okay, so Greta Garbo would usually play this mysterious European woman. And Joan Crawford was very much like a femme fatale type character. Mary Pickford, constantly cast as this very sweet innocent girl next door, and they didn't have any like say in the matter. I think Mae West might have like been able to assert her control a little bit more, because she had created kind of her own brand, if you like. But they were very much told where to go and what to do by the studio. So these 7-year contracts, the studio did not just own you as an actor, they owned you. They owned your image. They could tell you who you should be dating. They would give you a wardrobe. They would give you a place to live. They would provide for you, but you had to live a very clean-cut life. In each studio had someone called a fixer. If you want to watch a film about this, you should watch a film called Hail Caesar, which is all about a Hollywood fixer. And these fixers fixed problems. So if there was an unwed actress who became pregnant, the fixer would help the actress to either get married very, very quickly, or they would help the actress to go out of town for a few months and then come back and be like, I have adopted this baby. So the fixer was there to sort problems. And these, those are a couple of tame examples. These fixers also, had links with gangsters, and they could, there's lots of rumors about fixers in this era, like maybe making people disappear, for example, if they if they were bad for the studio. So this is a time for it was a very traditionally moralistic time. So if you were a gay actor in Hollywood at this time, there is no way that you would have come out. You would have, the studio would have fixed you up with a fake marriage in order to cover up any of your histories. And the studios also, like we have here with Judy Garland, controlled your image. So she was a child star, a lot like Shirley Temple, but she was extremely famous. And then she was obviously, Dorothy in the Wizard of Oz. And the studio controlled her image, but they wanted her to remain like a little girl, because that was the movie image that she had, this little girl next door type. And as she started to develop into a woman and her body started changing, they started giving her pills to suppress her hormones so she could remain more childlike and keep working for them in these roles that they were creating for her. And this led to a lifetime of substance abuse for this particular actress. And that's just one that we know about. I mean, that what actresses had to go through for roles in terms of sexual favors and abuse is not a secret in this particular era. If you wanted to get a contract at Warner Brothers, then you would have to put your body out there, for somebody in the company in order to get that job, potentially. So it was the norm, sadly, at the time. Okay, I'm going to skip through this, teacher, if you want to have a little look at what Judy Garland was famous for. Here we go. Wizard of Oz, right there. It's the famous Follow the Yellow Brick Road scene with the Munchkins. Okay, another really, really famous example of Hollywood abuse is through this 7-year contract is Marilyn Monroe. Her real name was Norma Jean Baker, and this is what she looked like pre-Hollywood contract in the red. Girl Next Door, brown hair. Look at this. I see a slightly different nose and a slightly different chin. So the studio, she got a contract with the studio, and the studio remade her into this blonde bombshell. They dyed her hair, they gave her plastic surgery, they gave her elocution and singing lessons, which is when you think of Marilyn Monroe, you think of her as speaking in this very particular way. And that's because she had gone through such vigorous training that she was thinking so much about every single syllable that she was putting out there that she had a very slow and deliberate delivery of her script. So the studio had control over this image. Okay, this was the studio's creation, Marilyn Monroe. Okay, so let's just think about Vertigo for a second. Alfred Hitchcock. So even though this film was made in the late 50s, in interviews with Alfred Hitchcock, he still talks about the actresses that were contracted to him. He had particular favourites. Grace Kelly was one of his particular favourite actresses. And when she left Hollywood and she went to Monaco and became a princess, Alfred Hitchcock was heartbroken, well, angry with her. And he spent a lot of his later movies trying to recreate her image of like this very classy, very cool ice blonde. And he would bring actresses in and reinvent them, recreate them, and trying to kind of like capture that essence again. But he never really did. So Alfred Hitchcock did have actresses contracted to him, actresses that he discovered, and wanted to recreate this sort of like Grace Kelly style performance in them. Alfred Hitchcock, Paramount Studios for Vertigo, but by 1958 the studio system was starting to crumble, and more on that later. And distribution was eventually sold on to Universal in 1964 for Vertigo. So a couple of studios involved there with the production of it. How could I forget? Another really important thing in this era, censorship. This is like the 1930s, right? We have two distinct eras in Hollywood. Pre-code films, which are really quite racy, so it's just kind of like that silent era going into the talkies. Films are really quite racy. I mean, people would talk about sex. They were much more open about different types of relationship. You would see more people of color on screen, and then the US went through a period of traditional values. Okay, so we have the introduction of the Hays Code. This is about censorship. So each state in the US would have had different censorship laws. So some states would have been quite liberal and you'd have been able to see a movie with boobs in it in one state, and then you'd cross the state line and then that film would be banned. So this was like a national office of censorship, and you would send your film to the censors and they would give you lots of very helpful feedback. If you want this film to be released nationally, then you need to fix these problems. And there was a set of rules that you had to follow, and it was called the Hays Code. So if you wanted your film to be released, you had to follow these rules. And I want you to remember, this is like a prohibition style era of very strict morals. And what they thought they were doing with the Hays Code, they thought, here's the phrase, they thought that they were protecting the moral fibre of the audience. Okay, so this is all about protecting the audience from, the evils of Hollywood. So let's have a look. So this was made in 1931. This was a really controversial scene, okay, in a film called Public Enemy. This is a Warner Brothers gangster movie starring James Cagney. And this was one of the most controversial things that happened in cinema for years and years and years. So let's have a look at this scene. This is about as violent as you could have got.
It's all ready, Tom.
Ain't you got a drink in the house?
Well, not before breakfast, dear.
I didn't ask you for any lip. I asked you if you had a drink.
I know, Tom. I will. There you go.
What was this again? wish you wasn't wishing well. So that I could tie a bucket to you and sink you.
Maybe you found someone you like better. Oh.
There it is. A grapefruit to the face. That was they got away with that scene through the censors because the character that James Cagney plays in this film is a villain. He's a villainous character. He's someone who will get his comeuppance in the end. Okay, so one of the ideas with this Hays Code is that we must see the moral high ground win in the end. So if you have a character that exhibits like characteristics such as James Cagney right there, then they're going to have to be punished. People watching this film are going to have to know that that's not acceptable. So this character is going to have to be punished. And we still get that idea, don't we, in films today, this idea that at the end of the day, the wrongdoers are going to be like punished, either physically, emotionally, or ideologically, okay? They're going to get their comeuppance. And that's a really interesting thing to think about in terms of film, because it completely depends on the point of view of the society, if you like, that produces the film. So what is considered wrongdoing in one era doesn't apply to like the next generation. So, for example, you know, you might have grown up with films where a woman who exhibits strong characteristics and sexuality and a powerful, strong female character in this era would have been punished. There's a film called Jezebel in which this happened, where the character is implied to be promiscuous and independent, and therefore that character has to be punished in the end because that was considered to be amoral and wrongdoing. So here's the actual rules of I went off on a tangent. Here's the actual rules of the Hays Code. Here we go. So 3 kind of principles. Principle number 1, no picture shall be produced that will lower the moral standards of those who see it. Henceforth, sympathy of the audience should never be thrown to the side of crime, wrongdoing, evil, or sin. So that's what I'm talking about right there. So audience sympathies can't be with the bad guy. That's one of the rules of the Hays Code. Okay, so we don't have like sympathetic villains. We have very clear good guy, good intentions. He is gonna win at the end of the day. Okay. Correct standards of life, subject only to the requirements of drama and entertainment, shall be presented. I don't know where this accent is going, but it's getting very, very interesting. 3, law, natural or human, shall not be ridiculed, nor shall sympathy be created for its violation. All right, so those are the rules. We've got an image right there of Jezebel from the film Jezebel, and that's Bette Davis. So what the wording of this is really interesting. If you look at it, look at where it says correct standards of life, natural human law. The implications here are that it's all about traditional values, which means that adultery, homosexuality, all these things would not have been acceptable in a film at this time. And if any character is implied to do any of these things, then a character is going to be punished within the narrative of the film. It also meant that we couldn't have any scenes of nudity, no sex scenes, and methods of crime were going to be off screen a lot of the time. So what you'll see in some of these films in this era is that you'll see people being murdered off screen, or crimes being committed off screen, or, you know, sort of you'll see the reaction of the murderer, but you won't see the methods of crime. So all of these implications mean that the films had very traditional ideologies. And also when it comes to sort of like things, scenes of passions were classified with where the lady is in an embrace with the man and she has both feet off the ground, which is where the infamous, if you have ever seen a rom-com, the infamous foot pop comes about. So if you imagine a scene where a couple are kissing, you'll often see like the female character raise her foot in a foot pop, like a little, like the foot will just go like that. That is to imply a scene of passion. Only one foot is allowed to be raised off the floor. You've never seen anyone do that in real life, have you? So why would they do it on film? They do it on film to give you a code. This means like passion, it means sex. So that foot going like that, that is an indicator of sexual attraction, because during this time you would know, because the implication of a woman having both feet off the floor would be that she was like having sex. So 1 foot acceptable, 2 feet no. Okay, our particular focus director, Alfred Hitchcock, he was known for pushing the boundaries of what was acceptable. That's a good quote to use when we're describing his approach to things. He pushed the boundaries of what was acceptable. So one of his early films was called Notorious, made in 1946, and it was a spy film, it was, it's a sexy spy thriller, and it's about 2 spies who fall in love. But because of the Hays Code, you couldn't really show any sex. So this is what Hitchcock does. And one of the rules of these scenes of passion is that you can't show a kiss for more than, I think it was 3 seconds, I think. So a kiss can't last longer than 3 seconds. 1, 2, 3. Which is why in films of this era, if you've seen a lot of them, you'll get this face smush thing where the 2 actors kind of like put their faces together and they're like, I love you, darling. I know, I love you too. And they're kind of like, they're facing the camera and their faces are like side by side and smushed together, and you're thinking, why are you doing that? It's because they can't show them kissing, but they want to show them as being close and intimate. So the old face smush was a convention of this time, but Hitchcock takes it to the next level. This video is age restricted. Let's take a little look. Okay, here we go. Oh, it's gone. Oh, it's back. This is a film called Notorious by Alfred Hitchcock, an infamous scene, it would appear.
It's nice out here. Let's not go out for dinner. Let's stay here.
We have to eat.
What you need here? I'll cook it.
I thought you didn't like to cook.
No, I don't like to cook. But I have a chicken in the icebox and you're eating it.
What about all the washing up afterward?
We'll eat it with our fingers.
Tell me, leave me plates.
Yes. One for you and one for me.
Do you mind if I had dinner with you tonight?
I'd be delighted. Where are you going?
Well, if you're going to stay in, I have to telephone the hotel, see if there are any messages.
You have to.
I have to.
This is a very strange love affair.
Why?
Maybe the fact that you don't love me.
Hello? Palace Hotel? Telling base? It's T.R. Devlin. Any messages for me? When I don't love you, I'll let you know.
You haven't said anything.
Actions speak louder than words. There is? Good. Read it to me, please. Prescott wants me over right away.
Did he say what about it?
No,
Maybe it's our assignment.
probably. anything back with me?
Yes. What about a nice glass of wine? A celebrate.
What time you come back?
7 o'clock.
Bye.
Steamy. Okay, so what Hitchcock does there is he uses the long take. He uses so the camera never leaves them and they never leave each other. It is like it's a two shot, it's a tour all the way around, and they talk, they kiss, they talk, they kiss, they talk, they kiss. So it feels as if they're just like having one long passionate kiss, but actually they're not technically breaking any rules. The Hays Code had to release it because technically they weren't kissing for anything longer than was allowed. It's just that it was all like filmed in such a way that made it look very intimate, and the fact that they were talking kissing, and they were only talking about what they wanted to eat for dinner. Nothing other than that, of course. So, the double entendre there is also an extra like little layer here about what they're going to get up to that evening. Saucy. So saucy. So, to recap for a second, the studios had an incredible amount of control over their actors, their writers, their editors. They were owned by the studio. They had control over the cinemas and the distribution and the means of production. The studio heads, the bosses of those studios were men of incredible power. And in 1938, things started to unravel. So some theatre chains, some independent theatre chains who weren't owned by any of the majors, started to file lawsuits against the major studios because of their unfair practices, such as block booking and blind bidding. As you can see there, it took 10 years for this lawsuit to actually become anything. And in 1948, it was called the Paramount Decree, because Paramount was the first major studio to agree to sell off part of their business so that they weren't controlling and strangling, essentially, the creativity of the industry. So they were forced by law to break up their companies. Paramount was the first studio that did it, so it's called the Paramount Decree. So these studios still exist, but this particular era, they had to sell off an element of their business. So most of them sold off the theatres, the cinemas, the movie theatres, and concentrated on making films and distributing films. That meant that they weren't vertically integrated anymore, and it meant more a healthier business environment for Hollywood. There you go, just go with that. Oh, off he goes, just as I'm about to finish this up. Okay. So, the Paramount Decree was really heralded the end of this particular era. This was an era of strict regulation and control. So you have the Hays Code to protect the moral fibre of the audience, but you had strict censorship. The studios would have controlled the output, of the company very, very stringently. And then television came along in the 1950s and admissions started to dip. Lots of things happened in the 1950s. It was a real change of kind of like thought and ideology in the US. Okay, you have the birth of the teenager in the 1950s. Okay, people had more money, people had more freedom, and like especially young people became a really big market, and the types of movies that a lot of these big studios were making didn't really appeal to young people. They were kind of old-fashioned, big grand epic musicals or sword and sandals, sort of like romps and things like that. They appeal to sort of like more of the parents' generation than the kids' generation. The B movies, such as the Universal pictures, they became more popular again in the 1950s. But things for the studios were starting to change. the television coming into the home took like a massive hit off their profits because people didn't have to go to the cinema anymore to like have that kind of entertainment. Some of the studios, such as Warner Brothers, started creating sort of like television shows as well as movies, which saved their profit margins. But mostly, a lot of the studios struggled. Studios such as RKO went under. Okay, so we have 48 is really when the era starts to end. Our film that we're talking about is like mid 50s. So by this point in time, we're talking about a studio system that is really starting to come like apart at the seams, whereas the studios had like control, and the Hays Code had control over the output. Things were starting to change by the time that Vertigo was produced, meaning that Alfred Hitchcock in particular had a lot more freedom. He could imply more taboo subjects. So we just saw Notorious, one of his films in the 1940s. The Hays Code was really strictly sort of like limiting what could be done there. And then in the films that we're going to watch now for Alfred Hitchcock, we're going to see more overt references to sex. There's a really great scene at the end of a film called North by Northwest. That implies, so we have a couple, it's the end of the film, the couple are free, they're together, they're on a train, and Alfred Hitchcock uses the metaphor of a train going into a tunnel at the end of the film to pretty unsubtly like imply that this couple are having sex on the train. So by later in the era, he can be a lot more obvious with his metaphors. So that's what we're going to be looking for in Vertigo. Alfred Hitchcock really likes taboo subjects. His films are all about sex and violence and murder. But the Hays Code, he can't show these things, so he can just imply these things. So look out for that when we watch it. One of the key things that I want you to think about when it comes to writing an assessment on this is that this studio system era was strict controls for the director. Really, strict and strangling for the director. And later in the era, we have Alfred Hitchcock able to creatively find ways around some of the censorship rules and some of the guidance rules. Okay. Whew, that is me finished. Thank you so very, very much. That's all from me and Buster. He's happy to see you. Good luck with Vertigo. Thank you so much. Okay, bye-bye.